TxMQ's Disruptive Technology Group. I'm going to jump in and get started. I'm going to ask you just a quick matter of housekeeping if you can hold your questions till the end. If you've got any technical questions or anything you need help with, do feel free to ask a question or raise your hand during the session. Otherwise, we're going to hold actual questions about the topic until the end. Thanks very much for your patience. We've got a lot of folks online here and a lot of fun material to get through. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Chuck Freed. I'm the President and CEO of TxMQ. I'm going to be joined today by Craig Drabik, who's the technical lead with us in our Disruptive Technologies group. And our marketing team always tells me we need to be a little bit more personal with some of these decks here. So a little bit about me. 10 kids, no joke. That's my wife and I and our 10 kids. Also got a couple of these and a cat, not pictured. Sorry about that. Oh, there he is. That's Charlie. Say hi, everybody. Just the one wife, not a blended family, 31 years together. Hold your applause. And yes, a little bit of a Star Trek geek. That's me with one of my sons. And one grandson. He is new and he is spectacular. And of course, I am really, really passionate about transformative or disruptive technologies in the mid-market enterprise like distributed ledger.
Hey folks, I'm Craig Drabik. I am the technical lead for the Disruptive Technologies group. I do not have any kids. It's just me and the dog. This is what I do on the weekends, race go-karts at insane speeds. And I am more of a Star Wars guy than a Star Trek guy.
And we'll discuss that after the session. All right, let's get a little bit of background on TxMQ. It looks like a lot of you that are on today are not currently customers, so I thought a little bit of brief history would be warranted. So the company was founded in 1979, which makes us really old. I joined the company in 2000, and I bought out the founders a few years after that. We've had, over the years, hundreds of successful client partnerships, and please do go ahead and ask us for references because we do love to share those. Our traditional or our non-blockchain lines of business are enterprise application development, application infrastructure managed services. We include in that DBA and systems admin services that we provide for a number of companies and industries, and we have a staff augmentation side of the house as well. We also partner with dozens of large system integrators and software companies, and we are partnered with IBM, Oracle, VMware, Microsoft, Swirlds, Ethereum, Red Hat, and many, many others. So let's jump in here. Distributed ledger technology. Why are so many companies investing so much in this technology so quickly? What is it? Do you need to be worried about it? Is it time to begin looking at some use cases to build out some proofs of concept? And are your competitors already one step ahead of you? Distributed ledger technology, what is it? So think of your checkbook as a ledger of transactions. You record the amounts that come in and go out, when each credit or payment occurred, who the party you transacted with was. A distributed ledger replicates that information in the ledger through a network of participants that we call nodes. Each node receives a copy of the ledger, and the ledger data is kept in sync as transactions are processed. Now, blockchain is a type of distributed ledger. The thing to understand about distributed ledger technology is it is what we call immutable. In the exact same way where your bank might make an error in your favor or in their favor. They accidentally debit or credit you $1. That error is never going to leave your ledger. The correction to that error will appear, but you're never going to change the initial error, the initial entry. That is what we mean when we talk about immutable. You've got that audit trail, that log of everything that happened. In blockchain, transactions are grouped into blocks. Each block points to the block that preceded it, which forms a chain. In addition to this, each block in the chain is cryptographically signed. So if the data contained in the block were to change even a little bit, then the signature changes. Each block also has the signature of the previous block. So the integrity of the chain is verified by regenerating each block's signature and comparing it to the one stored in the next block. So blockchain replicates the information in the ledger throughout a network of participating nodes. Each node gets a copy of the blockchain, and data is kept in sync as transactions are processed. In order to maliciously modify the data in the blockchain, an attacker would have to change the same data and rewrite the signatures in many places across the network. It's extremely unlikely that such an attack could succeed. A metaphor or analogy that I heard recently a commentator gave was, it's easy to target a person, it's hard to target a town. It's easy to say, I'm going to steal from that person. It would be really hard to say, I'm going to steal from that town. So that's what we mean when we talk about these, some of the security that's built into distributed ledger technologies in terms of how difficult it would be for a bad actor to target the entire system. By design, a blockchain network provides immutability, which we talked about, decentralization, because again, the ledgers are spread out, fault tolerance, and transparency. We're going to talk about a few different options here, different blockchain platforms. So Bitcoin is arguably the first true blockchain use case, and it's certainly the first one that came to prominence that people have heard of that aren't necessarily involved with the technology. So it's the first example of an application that's built on blockchain. It is, of course, a digital currency. We're not really going to talk a lot about that in this session today. And it can be used to make payments between parties without a third-party intermediary. Bitcoin can also be held and traded as investments, as most of us know. Bitcoin's blockchain, however, was built specifically for the purposes of trading in Bitcoin. It has very limited utility as a platform for developing solutions based on blockchain technology. Ethereum, as an example, though, is a general-purpose public blockchain. Ethereum includes a capability they introduced called smart contracts. A smart contract contains business logic that actually lets you build a distributed application. It allows a transaction to proceed when the conditions coded into the contract are satisfied. Smart contracts make Ethereum really well suited for building applications that would benefit from a distributed ledger infrastructure. Bitcoin and Ethereum are both public ledgers. They're designed to be open so that any interested party can transact on the network. However, blockchains can also be deployed internally as private ledgers. In a private system, participation is limited to verified participants. You decide who gets to participate. It's what we call permissioned. In addition, we can also give different participants different permissions and privileges. Hyperledger is an example of a blockchain platform that organizations can deploy as a private permissioned platform. It was developed by the Linux Foundation, and it's backed by a number of large players, including our friends at IBM. It features a very mature software development kit, which makes it a front-running platform for enterprise deployment.
Just to expand a little bit on the concept of a private ledger. In a private ledger, not only are the participants, the users, known to the system in most cases, the nodes themselves are known to the system in advance. So in Ethereum, anybody could stand up an Ethereum node, join it to the network. That's a public system. In a private permission system, the nodes have to be specifically permissioned to allow them to join the network.
Consensus. So achieving consensus on a blockchain is an expensive and time-consuming process. I'm not going to get really into the guts on this, but I'd be happy to offline with anyone that's curious about this. So the network can actually take many minutes to mine new blocks, and the computational resources that are invested by miners who aren't selected to add the next block are wasted. Bitcoin today is limited to a maximum throughput of about 7 transactions a second. So I introduced a new term here called a miner. So every miner on a blockchain network is a node, but not every node need be a miner. Mining is the process of achieving consensus. It's a computational process, multiple nodes trying to achieve consensus on a particular transaction. Only 2 that achieve the nonce, which is a coded hash, are actually going to go ahead and write into the next block. Any other computation that occurred is literally wasted energy and just goes poof.
Chuck just described what we call a proof-of-work consensus model. There are other models to achieving consensus. They use various techniques to do so. Some involve staking an amount of cryptocurrency. Some are what I would call pseudo-distributed, where there's essentially a leader who decides who gets to mine the next block, and those are more appropriate for private networks as opposed to a public network.
I want to talk a little bit about Swirlds, which is a company that introduced Hashgraph, which is a next-generation technology of distributed ledger. Swirlds solves the issue of time to consensus in a couple of interesting ways, a few of which are patented actually. using an alternative to the mining process. So in this example, that's a commonly used physical representation or drawing of the Swirlds Hashgraph. Nodes distribute the incoming transactions throughout the network, and they also distribute information about which nodes have received transactions from and when those transactions occurred. And it's contained in this data structure that we call a hash graph. The way in which this occurs is usually something called the gossip protocol. So if we refer to the nodes, as we commonly do, as Bob and Carol and Ted as an example, if Bob is aware, talks to Carol using the gossip protocol and is aware of what Carol knows, it also gossips about gossip. Carol will also share information with Bob about what Carol learned about any other nodes. So this allows for very rapid consensus achieving. It also allows for a concept called virtual voting. And essentially, if Bob knows what Carol knows, and Carol knows what Ted knows, and Ted knows what Alice knows, and they've all gossiped with each other, Bob actually knows what all the other nodes know, and Bob can actually realize what the results of a vote will be. So this virtual voting concept allows for not only very rapid consensus realization, but allows us to introduce a concept of timestamping that is very difficult to do natively within blockchain. And once consensus has been achieved, all the nodes process all the transactions, resulting in consistency among the network participants. The Swirlds platform, as a result, generally achieves consensus in under 3 seconds. It can support very, very dramatic transaction throughput, far, far more than we can see in any of the other blockchain platforms. Swirlds has a number of other advantages over existing blockchain networks. Higher throughput, we talked about. Hashgraph eliminates the mining bottleneck and increases transaction throughput. Fairness. So unlike, and we didn't really get into how the economic incentive model works in some traditional blockchains, and it's a little bit outside the scope of this session here, but there is no economic incentive model built into Hashgraph. Economically incentivized platforms such as Ethereum and Hyperledger can actually allow for some unintended consequences where miners can favor certain transactions over others, and that's taken out of the equation in Hashgraph. Guaranteed consensus. So in most blockchains, consensus on a given transaction is not guaranteed but becomes more probable over time. Again, we've taken that out of the mix with Hashgraph as a result of their virtual voting technology. And lastly, security. Swirlds is not only a leaderless consensus mechanism, but it's actually a Byzantine fault-tolerant platform and is the only one that can make that mathematical claim. So I want to pause for a moment and actually talk about, let's just call it the traditional application stack, and answer a question that we seem to get asked more often than not by a lot of our customers and a lot of folks that we talk to, which is, well, how do I get started? How do I build something? I don't understand. So it's important to note that what we're talking about here with DLT, with distributed ledger technology, and I'm going to use that interchangeably whether I'm talking about blockchain or Hashgraph or something that hasn't come out just yet. But it still requires a UI. It still requires some of the other layers that we see in a traditional application build. We're talking here about the data layer and nothing much more than the data layer. DLT solutions still have to be integrated into systems like any other software. And most importantly, that final bullet point, not all use cases are good use cases. There's a lot of things that DLT is better at than traditional application builds. There are also many, many things that make no sense whatsoever being built on distributed ledger technology. Just because we can do a thing doesn't mean we should do a thing. We're going to talk about some use cases now that cross a number of different industries, and hopefully this will spark some conversation with some of you and prompt some thinking. Identity management is a very interesting one. One of the things that distributed ledger technology is very, very good at and has the potential to really do in an interesting way is reducing fraud and enhancing know your customer compliance, which is especially important to banking and financial services. In addition, it promises to be able to speed transaction close cycles. So how does it do that, and where do we see that opportunity? Well, again, if we think about the world today and we think about two disparate parties that don't know each other, and one is selling a bike and one wants to buy a bike, and they've met on Craigslist or they've met on eBay or they've met somewhere. They're not in the same city. They don't know how to get in touch with each other except through that platform. Bob's got a bike and Sally wants to buy the bike, and they've agreed the bike is worth $100. That has to involve a third-party intermediary today. There is no other way. No one's going to trust Sally's not going to say, I'll send you the money, and when you get it, send me the bike. And Bob's not going to say, I'll send you the bike, and when you get it, you'll send me the money. So we have this need for these third-party intermediaries, whether it's a bank, whether it's a PayPal, whether it's a Venmo, whatever it is. The way to avoid this today, of course, is you meet in person and you hand over fiat dollars, actual cash currency, and we've eliminated the need. But in most cases where there is a need to be geographically disparate, we're going to need some kind of a third-party intermediary. The original use case, Bitcoin, posited that, well, wait a minute, we don't need that any longer. The platform has the security. You can deposit fiat dollars into a virtual wallet, open up a Bitcoin account. These days there are hundreds of other options as well. And suddenly we've eliminated the need for that third-party intermediary. I don't have to trust you. I trust the system. I trust the technology. So that has some very interesting implications. Inventory, supply chain, and asset tracking. So again, if we go back to what we talked about a few slides ago, we have a permanent, immutable record of who owns what and when that will benefit traditional supply chain and asset tracking solutions. We've already seen some of these use cases being moved into production. We've seen it in global logistics. We've seen it in shipping. We've seen it in some other supply chain use cases. This promises to be truly game-changing technology and a truly game-changing opportunity. So we're very excited about that. And we've been building a number of use cases that have some very interesting touch points into supply chain. We talked a little bit about payments already, cryptocurrency, of course, being the original blockchain use case. It has the potential to completely streamline payments across borders and facilitate transactions where trust doesn't exist. It remains today in 2018 a very difficult concept of this moving money between borders. So as a case in point, we're sitting to you today from lovely, sunny Buffalo, New York, where the sun is shining and the palm trees are blowing in the wind, and it's just a stunning, beautiful 15 degrees outside with a wind chill of about 5 below zero. We sit, as many of you might know, and those of you that don't geographically, we are about 15 minutes away from the border of Canada. TxMQ has a Canadian entity and a U.S. entity, and occasionally has the need to move money from one entity to the other. The quickest way to do that is to write a check, get in the car, drive across the border, and deposit it in the other country's account. I kid you not. We've had these conversations with our banks. That is the quickest way to do so. We, of course, don't normally do that. You write a check, you deposit it, you wait the 10 days it takes to clear. With cryptocurrency, or almost any of these technologies, there's an opportunity to completely streamline that process. Provenance. Hashing techniques coupled with blockchain technology can provide a verifiable record of the contents and the history of documents. Physical assets could also be tokenized and tracked on the blockchain transparently. So to go a little bit deeper into some of these, voting gets to be very interesting. Blockchains provide an auditable, tamper-proof voting mechanism for shareholders or citizens. We see all kinds of interesting opportunities here. We've all seen issues and challenges with various voting systems out there. We don't have to talk about the big picture of federal systems, but even as we get into local, regional, and municipal, you talk about shareholder rights and shareholder voting. There are some interesting opportunities to dramatically improve the way some of these things are done on the traditional software stack and move some of those to DLT technology. Real estate's really interesting. I have to admit this isn't an area that I had thought about until we saw a few countries overseas, mostly in Central Europe, that have actually already begun to move some of their real estate systems onto distributed ledger technology. Again, you think about a property deed that is a representation of a physical piece of real estate that should exist forever. The idea of an immutable public record of title assignment has the potential to eliminate title insurance and completely speed up real estate transactions. So again, potentially very game-changing if we think about that implication there. Digital rights management, DRM techniques based on blockchain can provide systems that license media and pay licensees fairly based on use. This is an area that many of us on this call don't necessarily have a lot of exposure to, but it's something that we've been looking at. The area of artist rights, creative artists, whether you're performing artists, musicians, talent that are literally creating intellectual property with their mouths, with their voices, with their instruments, and protecting that is something that's become something of a concern in the entertainment industry today, especially with the ease with which we can digitally download things and copy things. Utilities. I know we have a number of utility companies joining us today. We have a number of utilities that we support currently as customers. There are new use cases emerging for utilities to leverage distributed ledger technology for managing not just smart meters, but also utility pole equipment, as well as implications for tying into Internet of Things IoT technology as well. I would also posit that we could include substation equipment monitoring and management and tracking as well using DLT technology. Healthcare certainly has dramatic opportunities for improvement, not just in the provision and quality of care, but also in the tracking of patient and records. Blockchain technology has some significant areas in which it started to penetrate already into healthcare, such as patient identification, data exchange, and also claims adjudication. Anyone that has any experience with or exposure to the claims adjudication process in healthcare knows that it's an area that is just ridiculously complicated, and there just ought to be a better way to handle that. Information exchange. Permissioned information exchange platforms built on blockchain technology can dramatically improve the exchange of data between parties in a trustless environment. Again, cryptocurrencies are one example that we've spoken about that allow for fair payment for use generated within the system itself. But again, when we think about systems that are inherently trustless, it's important to understand the ease with which one can deploy distributed ledger technology. An example that I often give to people is the toaster. So a toaster is very good at doing one thing and one thing only, which is turning a piece of bread into a piece of toast. But there are other ways of generating a piece of toast. You can put a piece of bread under a hot sun, and it will, in fact, turn into toast. It might take an hour, but it will toast. You can put a piece of bread into an oven, and it will turn into toast. Again, it's less efficient. It's going to generate more heat, cost more in terms of electricity, take a little bit longer than a toaster, but you'll get a piece of toast. So again, when we think about distributed ledger technology, it is just another way to build applications, but it's a better way and a quicker way to build certain types of applications. In the Internet of Things, we've touched on a little bit here. Blockchain technology can allow devices to collaborate securely and collect payment for services as they're consumed, and also allow for ease of tracking and monitoring. There's also a lot of very interesting emerging distributed ledger use cases. These are cases, opportunities for systems and technologies and even lines of business that simply didn't exist before the introduction of distributed ledger technology. We've seen a number of consortia of companies getting together to collaborate to allow them to scale, to challenge large established industries. One example of this I read about just recently, I don't have a lot of additional detail other than what I've read in the trades, is IBM and Maersk Lines are spinning off a company to bring some of their technology to the market that is based on blockchain. This next bullet point is really interesting, and I'd love to see this come to fruition, but data can be exchanged and economized using distributed ledger platforms. Consumers can reclaim their data from centralized players like the Facebooks and the Googles of the world to control how that data is used and potentially benefit monetarily from its use. How nice would that be? And lastly, and we're not going to talk a lot about this, but companies can be launched and capitalized using cryptocurrency. Initial coin offerings, ICOs or ICOs, are an alternative way to raise funds by selling cryptocurrency for use in an ecosystem under development. I'm happy to talk more offline about that, but it's not something we're going to spend a lot of time on today. So as we start to wrap up here, getting started, and yes, you probably should be worried, not about the evil machine monster robot overlords coming down from the heavens, but about the fact that it's entirely possible that A, competitors of yours today are looking at this technology and starting to think about and figure out how to use it, or B, competitors of yours tomorrow that are currently sitting in a garage somewhere and aren't on your radar yet are probably already looking at building out some use cases. It can be a really, really daunting task assessing how to get started, especially with so few expert resources available in the market to help. We know this. We've spent a lot of time with a number of companies, including a number of people on this call, just trying to figure this out, understand how this works, where this can plug in. We are taking on select new customers for initial use case evaluation and solution build-out. We're offering attendees today our discovery session completely free with the purchase of our solution workshop. Or you can do it on your own, and it's completely viable, but it's a lot of work. You'd start, examine your existing and potential processes and systems that you'd like to improve or build out further. Again, it's important to understand this is, as I said a moment ago, just another way to build out technical solutions. If everything works great and you don't see any opportunity for improvement, you don't need to be on this call any longer. But if you've got a portfolio of technical challenges that you planned on solving with either the purchase of or the deployment of new technical solutions, building out software, it's important to include distributed ledger technology as one of the technologies that you evaluate for possible use. And then you would determine a fit for DLT, smart contracts, etc. Where does it fit in? Evaluate the currently available DLTs for feature set, maturity, scalability, security, etc. Plan the development, the integration, migration, and rollout, and of course, execute. Or you can let us help, and we'd be happy to do so. So what we're offering is our solution workshop and a free discovery session with the purchase of the workshop. What this actually includes is up to 1 week's time with one of our SMEs. This can be on-site or remote, up to a half week's time with a technical lead. This will result in a high-level design document build out of your use case. The discovery session includes phone time with our team to walk through relevant use cases to define a specific best case for your company. You also get access to our dedicated Slack channel, closed LinkedIn group, and Facebook groups. And I think this is the most interesting almost, which is early access to all TxMQ distributed ledger publications. This includes early drafts. This is actually a $17,500 package. Our solution workshop's regular price is $15,000. Our discovery session regular price starts at $2,500. Don't really know how to price access to the Slack channel and the LinkedIn group. And again, don't really know how to attach a price to the publication's early release. For those of you on this call today, for the next 30 days, we're offering this for $5,000. This is not being offered to all. Frankly, if everybody on the call were to sign up, we'd be overwhelmed. We're going to limit the involvement, and some of the determination is going to be based on the most interesting use cases. So once again, you get a leg up on your competition, many of whom are already building out DLT solutions, and most of you probably are already aware of that. On-site or phone-based one-on-one time with industry-leading experts in solutions building and distributed ledger technology, invitation to a dedicated Slack channel, Facebook group, and LinkedIn group, first look at upcoming articles to be published, including early drafts. And again, this is a $17,500 package. If you were to purchase it yesterday, you're not on this call. And again, most importantly here, it's a spec document and write-up that you get. Whether you decide to continue with us or not, you could take this design document and begin to move forward with your own build, all for just $5,000. So I don't want this to turn into a heavy-handed infomercial like Billy Mays sales pitch. So certainly you can begin on your own. By all means, if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to do some reading, do some research, get out to the conferences. But I do want you to understand that we're excited about this. We're all in. We think this is a really cool opportunity to work with a lot of you and for you to work with us to plug you into the existing community that's growing every day. Refer others. We can offer additional incentives for those of you who've already had a number of you refer others to us, and that's been really exciting. There's a bit.ly link here you can click on. Again, we are recording this. We'll make this available to you. There will be a link that you'll see immediately after the session. You can click on it. You can copy this down. You can email me directly. If we're not connected already on LinkedIn, do feel free to send an invite out to Craig or to myself. And yes, some terms and conditions apply. As I said, we're just not going to be able to do this for everybody, but we are excited to get started. We've enjoyed the build-outs that we've done thus far and looking forward to do others. And I'm going to go ahead now and try to open this up to questions. I sometimes screw this up, so bear with me. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we can start to get to it that way. If you don't have any questions, feel free to jump. I see a hand going up. I see another hand going up. I'm going to go ahead and try to unmute everybody. If you are not speaking, if you could go ahead and mute yourselves before I do that, that would be great. I see the question's been typed out. Thank you for that. We've got a question from Cliff Tillman. Where do you see this working for 3PL companies that participate in supply chain? So that's interesting. We've actually spoken to a few companies in this particular space. On the one hand, there are a number of initiatives already underway by some logistics suppliers. We had a conversation with a shipping company that was looking at a use case for controls within their, from what they called it, from dock to truck, so just within that dispatch area. For companies that participate in supply chain, I think it's a little bit of a first-to-market opportunity. We've got a few customers that are SAP customers that are looking at solutions that integrate with their SAP system. So, Cliff, that's a broad question. If you want to help fine-tune a little bit, I'd be happy to try to address that as well. Another question that Jeff offered, can we give more details on what would be done during the engagement? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. So the sessions begin, if you're local, we can come out and meet with you, as Jeff, I know you guys are. For the rest of you on the call, it typically starts with phone-based consulting, where we talk through some existing industry use cases as well as use cases that you have perhaps thought through. And we help you to identify one or two that maybe are the low-hanging fruit. What can we really do in a minimal amount of time to get you to something that looks like a minimally viable product, an MVP build-out, a design document that is where you can get some good bang for your buck, but you can also realize some early successes. So again, typically phone-based consulting to identify one or two use cases, ideally to whittle it down to one use case, and then we engage to really focus on a design document addressed to that specific use case. And again, what comes out of it is an actual design document, so you can proceed with it or not after that. Raj Pataparty, have you had any experience applying this technology to life insurance in the annuity sector? We have not, but we have done some build-outs of solutions that would be applicable. You want to talk about a little bit about that, Craig? Just, I'm thinking in terms of some of the work we've done is under non-disclosure, so I'm hemming and hawing to figure out what I can say, what I can't say. But in terms of insurances, an insurance policy is just something that has to be tracked. So there's a life cycle to an insurance policy. I don't mean the physical paper document. I mean the implications of what that policy is. So it is essentially, if you think about it, it is a supply chain question. And we have found as we've done this that a lot of these use cases under the covers, when you peel the onion, start to look a lot like supply chain.
There are some additional, some additional interesting avenues that the technology starts to open up when you think of a smart contract, which could encapsulate sort of a disposable one-time use insurance contract, right? So say in the case of a ride share or a car share, right, where I'm going to rent, quote unquote, rent a car for an hour, you could register, pay for a policy on the blockchain, use the car for the hour. At the conclusion of the hour, the payment is processed. If there is any problems, if you had an accident or whatever, that would trigger a different parameter in the smart contract that can start the claims process and things like that. So when you start to consider how the technology can speed up the creation and conversion of these kinds of products, then you start to have some really interesting opportunities that you just don't have in a world where people are involved in creating and managing those products.
I apologize that I'm just not able to figure out how to unmute some of you. Great, thanks, Raj. So Cliff asked this question that I'll read out loud, Craig, because I think this resonates with us. Mm-hmm. One of our biggest things in tracking ocean container throughout a movement, loading, truck move to port, ocean move, truck move to port to rail, truck move to rail, warehouse, etc. How do you get all these different entities to participate in the ledger? We've been trying to push companies to web services for over 20 years, and most still operate on EDI. How do you get the buy-in from so many players?
Yeah, so that's interesting. What we tend to find when we talk to customers about supply chain just broadly is the customer sits in a certain location in the chain and they really care about the person or people under them that they're buying from, and they care about the person above them who they're selling to, and that's it, right? So in the case of building an airplane, you have people who make nuts and bolts and people who mine aluminum and prepare sort of the raw materials, and those materials go into creating small components, which go into creating big components, and on up through the chain until you reach an airplane. So one of the interesting things about how a distributed ledger is structured and deployed is you deploy it on a number of nodes. Could be 10 in a small permission system. It could be thousands in a a global public system. But in a supply chain situation where people are all transacting, everybody would run a node, and everybody sort of has a stake in the ecosystem. That system, even though it may have originally been conceived for a single purpose, can start to be extended throughout people's lines of business. So if it's set up by an airplane manufacturer for a specific plane, then they may wind up leveraging that for other planes. They may have additional manufacturing lines of business that they start to leverage. So we start to build this out into an ecosystem where all the participants can benefit from participation in the platform, and not just as a point-to-point, whereas with a web service integration, you're trying to get your partners to use your specific web service for your specific use case. Those partners trade with however many other partners, and so they're looking at 50 or 100 point-to-point integrations, whereas with a distributed ledger solution that grows into an ecosystem, everybody has a stake in using the platform. You start to encourage a collaborative ecosystem instead of a collection of point-to-point conversations.
Yeah, I see Jay's chiming in saying we're also in the 3PL sector, and we can relate to that. The other thing that I would encourage you to think about, and we can certainly chat offline more about this because we've had a lot of these conversations. One of our customers has a really interesting, and actually not on this webinar, but they have an interesting philosophy on how this is going to change the world, not to be big picture and higher and mighty and everything's going to get lovely and wonderful and roses, but how it's literally going to evolve. And the way to think about it is not you're going to implement and deploy this technology and you've got to get buy-in, but rather there's an ecosystem build-out opportunity here, not entirely unlike the Amazon ecosystem where one buys something and gets a suggestion that others who bought this might want this as well, and also the opportunity to then rate the seller or the seller to rate the buyer. But if you think about that implemented in the supply chain and next generation of the supply chain, this particular customer of ours is in the, let's say, the defense industry. And let's say they're waiting on delivery of a particular part, and it's important that they know when they're going to get that part because they need it to build, let's say, an airplane wing or an avionics build out or an assembly or what have you. Today they can see they have visibility to a certain point in that particular supply chain, but they don't have visibility all the way down to the guy in the field that's digging out the raw material that's going to become the ingot, that's going to become the metal that's going to get poured into the mold, that's going to become a bolt. And they want that level of visibility. They want to be able to see that and to track that. And this technology will allow for that. The way to get there isn't to say to your supply chain, we're going to require to use those things, but to say, would you love to have this greater visibility? Would you love to have greater control of your downstream suppliers as well as your upstream suppliers? Would you love to be able to be better evaluated? So they're looking at this as a democratization of that supply chain that in many cases, in many industries, is employed by really large global behemoths. But this opportunity to, if I can make up a word, to Amazonize this industry or this sector. And what I mean by Amazonize, in the past, if you went to the store and you wanted to buy toothpaste, you're buying a Procter & Gamble product, pretty much. They sort of controlled the Crest, the Colgate, more or less everybody else there. Maybe there's one or two other large suppliers. You can see today, and again, I'm not going to apply this to toothpaste necessarily, but to a lot of products and services that we acquire today from online retailers, they're provided by third parties that are sometimes transparent to us, but we can take a look at them, see who they are. I know that I recently ordered a pair of sports, just running glasses basically online somewhere, and I was surprised to find out that when I got them 3 days later, prescription mind you, they came from China, from a company that I'd never heard of. So that opportunity for that supplier in China to get plugged into this global marketplace is something that our customer sees beginning to happen in the supply chain particularly. And again, this is a big defense contractor, so it's interesting that they can see that future. So I would encourage you guys, Cliff and Jay in that space, to just be as forward-thinking as you can, which doesn't mean throwing a lot of money into the wind, but it does mean recognizing that the winds of change are upon us, if I can wax philosophic for a moment. Any other questions or comments from anybody?
I'll just
Go ahead,
take off on that quickly. Is the idea of collaboration is pretty strong with this technology, and you can see it in how some of these products have been launched and brought to market. There's a blockchain implementation called Corda, which is for the financial services industry. It's by a consortium called R3, I want to say that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a number of competitors, essentially, who decided that, it makes sense for us to open this ecosystem up a little bit, right? Like, they're competitors, but they also do business with each other. Money moves from one financial institution to the other, and a lot of pain comes along with the roadblocks and impediments in doing that, and with pain comes expense. So we see in the space already this movement towards less of an 800-pound gorilla building a system and forcing everybody to use it, although that's certainly happening, but also consortiums of companies, whether they're a bunch of small companies looking for a way to penetrate a market, or a bunch of large existing players looking at the competitive landscape and saying, we have a problem here, let's bring a solution to market to help everybody. Those kinds of solutions are being launched as parts of consortiums. So I think it's important to consider working with your competitors in some cases, in the cases where it makes sense, because this technology has the potential to tear down some of the roadblocks that will make an entire industry more efficient, and in doing that will make you more efficient.
Yeah, great point. All right, I don't see any other hands going up or any other questions. So certainly do feel free to email us. I'm really easy. It's chuck@txmq.com. Again, feel free to look for Craig or myself on LinkedIn and elsewhere. I'm not sure where else it would be, but certainly do feel free to reach out and say hi, follow up with any questions. I want to thank everybody for your participation today. If anyone's interested in the recording, again, reach out to us. We'll make it available. When you log off from the session, you'll see some links that you can follow for follow-up on your end. And do thank you again.